MoMA, plus Juno Award-winning singer-songwriter William Prince, and the major exhibition of indigenous pottery at the Met. I'm Allison Stewart. Join me for all of it, weekdays at noon on WNYC.
Coming up on Business Daily on the BBC World Service, we look at the controversial CV of the man chosen to lead this year's COP28 climate change conference in Dubai. Dr. Sultan Al Jaber is a climate diplomat and a renewables expert. But what's angered environmentalists is that he's also the boss of an oil company. More with me, Sam Fennick, after the latest world news.
BBC News. A ceasefire has come into effect between Israeli troops and Hamas fighters in Gaza after sporadic explosions in the first half hour after the deadline. Both sides have said the pause would only be temporary. It's scheduled to last 4 days. Under the deal, lorries containing desperately needed medical supplies, fuel and food have begun to make their way into Gaza. 13 Israeli hostages held by Hamas are due to be released. Under the deal, lorries containing desperately needed medical supplies, fuel and food have begun to make their way into Gaza. 13 Israeli hostages held by Hamas are due to be released later on Friday. A victim impact statement by the mother of Reeva Steenkamp, who was murdered 10 years ago by the former Paralympian Oscar Pistorius, says she is not convinced that he has been rehabilitated. The athlete is facing a parole board to consider his early release. Taiwan's opposition parties, which want closer relations with China, have failed to agree on a single candidate to run in January's election. A split in the opposition vote will boost the chances of the front-runner, the current vice president. North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un has said his country's recent launch of a spy satellite has propelled the country into a new era of space power. He was visiting the country's space agency. The Afghan embassy in Delhi says it's permanently shut down due to what it calls persistent pressure from the Indian government and the Taliban rulers in Kabul. The diplomatic staff were appointed by the previous Western-backed Afghan government that collapsed in 2021. Irish police have arrested 34 people in Dublin following rioting blamed on far-right protesters. There's been looting and several police officers were injured. A new species of dinosaur has been discovered in Brazil. Scientists say Pharloicnus rapidus lived in the desert more than 100 million years ago. BBC News.
Hello and welcome to Business Daily. I'm Sam Fennick, and today I'm delving into the CV of the oil boss, controversially given the job of leading the world's most important climate change talks.
Let's welcome the President-designate of COP28, His Excellency Dr. Sultan Al Jaber. Let's give him a warm welcome.
I want to know more about Dr. Sultan Al Jaber, President of the COP28 Climate Change Conference, which starts in Dubai next week. It's fair to say his appointment has split the room.
Putting an oil boss in charge of the world's climate talks is basically like putting an arms dealer in charge of peace talks. It is an absolute disaster.
The reason some environmentalists are so angry is that Sultan Al Jaber runs the Abu Dhabi state oil company ADNOC, but he's also the founder and current chairman of the green energy giant Masdar, which has a presence in more than 40 countries around the world.
He's 17 years a global renewable energy champion. He is an expert in conventional energy, oil and gas. He's also an expert in climate diplomacy. So it's hard to point to somebody who has a track record equal or better than that.
So, a unique set of skills, a chance to bring activists and polluters together, or a clear and outrageous conflict of interest. All that's coming up on Business Daily from the BBC World Service. And the landmark Paris Agreement has just been signed. Governments around the world have come together and agreed to limit their emissions. It's a pivotal moment in the fight against climate change, and it all happened at a COP meeting.
I don't know how many we were in this room, several thousand of people, dancing, crying because it was so difficult to agree on something so big.
That's Professor Laurence Tubiana, currently Chief Executive of the European Climate Foundation. Back in 2015, she was France's climate change ambassador and one of the driving forces behind the Paris Agreement.
Why there was so much joy at the end is because people was pessimistic about the capacity to deliver that. You felt the fear along the 2 weeks. So I think that's, if I may transmit that emotion, combating the fear and finally exploding in joy at the end. And so I will remember that all my life, yes.
It was a beautiful moment. And the reason Laurence Tubiana and I are talking about it is to underline just how important COP meetings are. So being COP president is a huge and vital job, but it's not normally a particularly controversial one. I just wondered, have you met Dr. Sultan Al Jaber?
Yes, I know Dr. Sultan from many years because he has been leading the climate negotiation for many years when he was a Masdar representative.
What do you make of him? What sort of person is he? Can you describe him for us?
I think he's a very, very intelligent person, a very good communicator. I think he's sincere in his concern about what has to happen. Then he is now in an incredibly difficult position, if I may say so, for him, where he's leading a big company, not the biggest company at world level on oil and gas, but a big one. And of course, his neighbors are very keen to continue the oil and gas economy. So I don't know how he managed all this contradiction.
Climate change campaigners have expressed outrage at the appointment of the head of one of the world's biggest oil companies as president of this year's UN Climate Summit in the United Arab Emirates.
Earlier this year, 130 US senators and European lawmakers signed an open letter to the US President Joe Biden and EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, demanding Dr. Sultan Al Jaber be replaced. And hundreds of environmental campaigners and organisations have written to the United Nations to express their concerns. What's angered campaigners is that rather than scaling back, ADNOC, the oil company Dr. Sultan Al Jaber runs, has pledged to increase capacity from 4 to 5 million barrels a day by 2027. ADNOC says that this is capacity, not production, and says the carbon footprint from its oil production is significantly less than the global average. So I'm in the newsroom now. This is where we make business daily. I'm in front of my computer and looking at Sultan Al Jaber's LinkedIn page, and there's some really interesting stuff on here. So he served as a Minister of State for the UAE government for 10 years. As we know, he's the Managing Director and Group CEO of ADNOC, the Abu Dhabi State Oil Company. But at the same time, he's also chairman of that renewable energy company, Masdar. And then if I scroll down a little bit more, I can see where he studied. He has a PhD in Business and Economics from Coventry University in the UK. And before that, he studied chemical engineering at the University of Southern California, graduating in 1997.
He is a person of many layers.
Akshat Rathi is the author of a book called Climate Capitalism. He's also a senior climate reporter for the business news organisation Bloomberg. And he's interviewed Dr. Sultan Al Jaber.
I met him in the COP offices in Abu Dhabi. He's a very tall guy, surrounded by many of his advisors, and it was a pleasant meeting.
Do you think that when you met him, you saw the real person, or was it this kind of PR polished individual?
For the profile of Sultan Al Jaber that we published at Bloomberg News, we spoke to nearly 50 people around him, and many of them did not want to go on the record. Many of them said that as an individual, he's quite controlling. But climate diplomats have also found him charming as a person to be around to talk to.
I asked Akshat to talk to me because I wanted to know more about ADNOC and Masdar, and also about the UAE's reliance on oil.
One of the lines that you hear not just from Sultan Al Jaber, but many people in the UAE is, yes, we are a country that is built on oil and gas, but we are also the country that is doing more on renewables than any other oil-producing country is. Those facts are true. And yet, the amount of renewables that the country has deployed is minuscule when you compare it to any other large economy of its size. So last year, less than 2% of all of its energy came from non-fossil fuel sources. And so, yes, it's done more than, say, Saudi Arabia, but that is a relative win, not a global win.
Does he see the hypocrisy of only producing less than 2% of energy from non-fossil fuels and then sitting at a table telling everyone that they've got to reduce their dependence on fossil fuels?
From his perspective, he comes back to the same line again and again, which is the world still demands fossil fuels, and we are going to supply those fossil fuels in the cleanest way that we can, while trying to push for more clean energy to be deployed. And it is a balance that has been a tricky balance for any oil-producing country. It is their main source of income. And so to give up on their main source of income is not going to be easy.
We are ADNOC. Together, we bring energy to life.
We can't be 100% sure about ADNOC's emissions because ADNOC does not disclose all its emissions. It only discloses emissions that come directly from its facilities, called Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. It does not disclose the emissions that are tied to burning of the oil and gas that it produces, which are called Scope 3 emissions.
And when you interviewed him about the recording of those emissions, and you asked him why don't they publicise them, what was his response to that?
Again, it is a relative answer, and it is a true answer in that sense, which is compared to other national oil companies, they give more information. But compared to an international oil company like Shell or BP or ExxonMobil, they give much less information. But they also don't have the pressure that international oil companies have from shareholders who are pension funds, etc. in the West, whereas ADNOC is fully owned by the UAE government.
Masdar has been a leading force in the clean energy transition since 2006. Inspired by the vision of the founding father.
So now that we've talked about ADNOC, why don't you tell me more about Masdar?
Masdar started out as an experiment to try and build a sustainable city within the UAE. The city was never fully completed. There are some really interesting experiments that you can go and see. However, since then, Masdar has become this renewable energy company that builds projects both in the UAE and across the world, solar projects and wind projects. And Al Jaber was CEO and now is chairman of Masdar and continues that role even as he is CEO of an oil company and the president of COP.
Hi Alice, it's Sam here.
Hi Sam.
Hello, nice to talk to you.
How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm all right, yeah. It's not the first time COP has been held in a major oil-producing nation. Qatar hosted it in 2012. But critics say it's simply unacceptable to have an oil boss leading the world's most important climate talks. Here's Alice Harrison from the campaign group Global Witness.
Yeah, I'm not particularly happy about it, and neither are many people around the world. You know, that appointment has been met with a lot of upset, a lot of anger, because putting an oil boss in charge of the world's climate talks is basically like putting an arms dealer in charge of peace talks. It is an absolute disaster. COPs, you know, they are always teeming with fossil fuel companies and their lobbyists. And that helps explain why progress has been so slow. They are directly opposed to the sorts of progress and ambition that we need to fix the climate crisis.
But Dr. Sultan Al Jaber has set up a huge renewable company called Masdar, and it has projects in 40 countries all around the world.
Yes, but ADNOC is much bigger. And if you think of what ADNOC is planning on doing, you know, this is the twisted irony at the heart of this year's COP. We have placed our trust in a man who has made millions from the burning of oil and gas and is planning on increasing that production yet more. This is not the man to be leading climate talks. We need someone who is committed to phasing down oil and gas production globally, then that is not who we've got.
I think he would say that he is committed to that, and that he has shown that commitment by having this massive renewable energy company.
Yes, but as I say, it pales into insignificance when you look at the global footprint of ADNOC. We also have to remember the UAE is built almost entirely on fossil fuel wealth. So arguably, the whole country, as well as Al Jaber, has a vested interest in keeping the world hooked on fossil fuels.
Shouldn't he be judged, though, on the outcome of this COP rather than your presumed outcome of what the COP might conclude?
Fair enough. Yes, look, obviously, I really hope that I'm proved wrong. I really hope that this is a successful COP with an ambitious outcome and a global commitment to phasing out fossil fuels. Unfortunately, what we're seeing currently is a lot of talk coming from Al Jaber and his team about false solutions like carbon capture and storage. Those are not real climate solutions. The real climate solution, the most urgent one, is to phase down fossil fuels.
But it is important to say that not everyone shares this point of view. Those close to him say that he's uniquely qualified.
Back in Masdar, we were doing presentations to President Bush. We were doing presentations to Prince Charles and King of Spain. And he was leading that nearly 2 decades ago.
Stephen Geiger was a founding director of Masdar alongside Sultan Al Jaber and knows him very well. Has he got the kind of persuasive skills, do you think, to lead a COP and persuade other oil nations to take the same stance, I suppose?
If anybody wants to take a look at that early development of Masdar, turning in basically a 5-person startup into what today I call sort of a 20, 30, 40 Masdar, it's 20 gigawatt clean energy portfolio spread over $30 billion of investment over 40 countries and 6 continents that has happened under his leadership. That's a pretty impressive clean energy track record. That's what I think a lot of the critics are not really taking a look at and too busy focusing on simplistic optics of him being the head of an oil company. He's got one of the most extensive global track records in advancing, promoting, developing not only clean energy, but also clean energy diplomacy.
I suppose the difficulty that some people might have is that there appears to be a conflict of interest. So as you say, he has these green credentials, but he's also in charge of an oil company, which he says is going to increase capacity by 25% in the next few years.
Well, yes. So let's address the issue of potential conflicts or perception of conflicts of interest and bias head on. Everyone's bringing their bias to the table. It's clear. And the question is that a bias that is going to block progress or water down progress? I think in some ways they might actually overcompensate because they feel the pressure of the potential bias. I think they all understand what's on the record here. It's to a large degree, the leadership of the country and even Dr. Sultan's legacy is going to rely on a successful outcome. I mean, keep in mind, the reason I think that both the country and Dr. Sultan on a personal basis are legitimate host and president is because they do represent the broadest possible constituencies. They understand and work with the industrialized North. They are a Muslim country, Middle Eastern country. They work actively with China and Asia and Russia and the other petrostates, Saudi and Iraq. That's the skill set I think that they're uniquely bringing to the table here, and it's absolutely critical if we're going to try to get any progress at COPE.
Let's end with a final thought from veteran COP negotiator Laurence Tubiana.
I think I anticipate a lot of tension in this COP. It will not be an easy one, by far. On top of this oil and gas issue, there is all the geopolitics that are really not in favor of, a common approach. And there is on top of that the problem of finance from developed countries to developing countries. So there is a lot of ingredients for a very tense discussion. And on my side, I don't know. I would not make any judgment on how it can unfold, really.
We asked ADNOC and the COP28 team for a response to some of the issues raised in today's programme. We haven't heard back from ADNOC, but the COP team told us that while some see a conflict of interest, It is in fact in our common interest to have someone with a deep understanding of the entire energy value chain in this role. They told us that Dr. Sultan Al Jaber's experience means he's in a unique position to bring public and private sectors together and find solutions to keep 1.5 within reach. Thanks for listening today. Business Daily will be back next week with 5 days of COP and climate change stories from around the world.
BBC World Service. And now witness history with me, Dan Hardoon. Today I'm taking you back 15 years to one of the most terrifying moments in Mumbai's history. On the 26th of November 2008, the Indian metropolis came under attack as 10 attackers from the Pakistan-based militant group Lashkar-e-Taiba targeted prominent locations, killing 166 people and injuring hundreds more.
Explosions from inside Mumbai's Taj Mahal Palace Hotel.
Tonight, Mumbai's 5-star Oberoi Hotel on fire.
The city's main railway station, a hospital. Another target was Leopold's Restaurant, a well-known Western-style cafe bar.
I've been speaking to 2 survivors of the attacks who came face to face with the gunmen.
Every second of that night feels like an hour to me. I remember it so well.
I thought this constant firing is now going to hit my chest or my head at some point. I was praying, and I thought I was going to die.
Among the first locations to be targeted was the Chhatrapati Shivaji terminus, one of India's busiest railway stations. At around 9:20 p.m, 2 of the gunmen, Ajmal Kasab and Ismail Khan, entered the passenger hall, firing AK-47s and hurling hand grenades. Among the crowds was Devika Rotawan, just 9 years old at the time.
There were children, there were elderly people, just waiting. And as soon as the firing started, everyone started running here and there. People were so panicked that they were pushing other people, trying to save their lives. Some people were getting hit in the head. There was blood splattering, and people were lying injured everywhere.
Devika's brother had gone to the toilet, but there was no time to look for him. She and her father ran for their lives.
While we were running, the bullet came and struck my leg, and in the chaos, I saw this guy with a gun. He was shot. He almost had a smile on his face, and it felt like he was getting a kick out of it.
Devika was seriously wounded by the bullet lodged in her leg and taken to hospital.
It was so chaotic that doctors were sometimes having to operate people without giving them sedatives. And I was just a little girl, so I was very scared. I had only seen fighting and guns and that kind of thing in movies.
58 people died in the attack on the train station. Devika, her father and brother survived. While she recovered in hospital, Kasab and Khan continued their rampage. At 10:30 p.m, they launched another attack on the Karma Hospital for women and children. Policeman Arun Jadhav and 6 of his colleagues were dispatched to the scene in a police car.
As soon as we entered, the firing started on our car. I also fired back. I fired 3 rounds, and that is when Kasab got injured. And in that ambush, 6 members of our car died. My right hand was hit by 3 bullets. My shoulder was also injured, and I was slumped over in my seat.
Ajmal Kasab and Ismail Khan pulled out 3 of the dead officers and drove off in the police car. They thought the 4 officers in the back of the car were all dead, but Arun was still alive. His colleague Yogesh Patil was slumped over him on the back seat, breathing shallowly.
I could see Kasab from the small gap between the seats. I could hear him talking in the northern Hindi dialect. And then Yogesh's phone started ringing, and that is when the attackers got alerted that there is someone in the back who might be alive, and they fired again. That bullet killed Yogesh. And if it had been even half a centimeter to the side, it would have killed me too.
The attackers sped off towards Mumbai's Metro cinema, shooting at bystanders from the window. Arun was close enough to have a clean shot at both of them. But earlier in the day, he'd given his 9mm pistol to another officer. He only had his loaded automatic rifle, which was too heavy to lift with his injured hand. He had little choice but to lay low and pretend he was dead.
If I were to make any noise, even a slight cough or heavy breathing, I would have been killed by the terrorists. I was there for 20 minutes, and every second of that time, I felt like I saw my death in front of me. There were a lot of things going through my mind. I was thinking of my family and my colleagues who had died that night. I was also thinking about the sense of duty that we have as police officers. I felt like I had been given an opportunity to nab these attackers, and I was concentrating on making sure that I did not let that opportunity go away.
The car's right tyre had been punctured by the gunfire, so the attackers eventually abandoned the car and hijacked a Skoda, heading towards the city beach. Alone in his police car, Arun seized his moment.
I took the wireless headset and I immediately alerted the other policemen that the attackers had taken this other car. Within 10 minutes, the car was stopped, Khan was killed, and Kassab was taken into custody.
Although these gunmen had been stopped, other members of the group continued to lay siege to the city. Over the next 60 hours, hostages were held at the Taj and Oberoi hotels and a Jewish community centre. The city was locked down as police searched for and killed most of the remaining attackers. It wasn't until restrictions were lifted that Arun's family were able to visit him in hospital.
I had escaped the jaws of death, and when I saw them, I was speechless. I only had gratitude in my mind, gratitude for God that I had somehow survived this.
Of the 10 men who attacked Mumbai, Ajmal Kassab was the only one captured alive by police. His trial began in April 2009. Devika Rotawan testified to his atrocities at the train station. Were you daunted by the prospect of getting up on the witness stand and reliving your memories of that day?
I was not at all scared. I walked into that courtroom with a deep grudge in my mind. I wanted revenge. It felt like they had stolen my childhood. I was very small, obviously, but at times I used to feel like I wished someone could give me a gun so I could kill him myself.
And do you remember how Kassab came across during the trial?
He was mostly just expressionless. There was no sign that he was feeling any guilt or repentance about what he had done.
Also giving evidence at the trial was Arun Jadhav.
Kassab had already confessed, but he had not mentioned the car incident. And my testimony helped the authorities pin down Kassab and give him the death sentence.
On the 3rd of May 2010, Ajmal Kassab was found guilty of offences including murder and waging war against India. He was sentenced to death by hanging and executed in 2012.
I was very happy when I got to know that he had been given the death sentence. I got calls from police officers, the media, and they were saying, "Congratulations, child. This attacker is going to be hanged." But it was only 50% happiness because Kassab was like a little mosquito. The actual mastermind of the attacks is still out there.
Although some of Lashkar-e-Taiba's leaders have been jailed in Pakistan for financing terror, many feel that the attack's perpetrators have yet to face true justice. For Arun and Devika, their lives have been permanently changed by what they went through that day.
There are nights when I'm awake at 2, 3 a.m. I'm not able to sleep. I just keep thinking about the attacks, so I start chanting God's name.
Before the attacks, I was just a small girl enjoying her childhood. Now I've finished my studies and I want to join the Indian Police Service. I want to end terrorism and do something for my country.
That was Devika Rotawan and Arun Jadhav talking to me, Dan Hardoon, for that edition of Witness History.
Next time on the New Yorker Radio Hour, Bradley Cooper. In his new film about conductor Leonard Bernstein, Cooper had to conduct one of the world's top orchestras, for real.
Scariest thing I've ever done by far. I mean, not even close. Singing at the Oscars live, performing at Glastonbury, nothing even comes close.
Bradley Cooper on Maestro, next time on the New Yorker Radio Hour. Listen tomorrow morning at 10 on 93.9 FM or get the podcast.